it's very much about a holistic response. I'm aware of the fact that we're in a water efficiency conference, but I think what I'm really going to talk about is actually a broader approach that people can adopt, that industry can adopt to water stewardship, to water management, which is holistic, and where water efficiency is a key component, but it's really just one aspect of what we see the role of business in water and water use in this country. So I think it fits in nicely to the broader aspects. We're talking about the broader context and some of the challenges that we face, not only obviously at a national level, but at a local level as well. So I framed the presentation in the context of what happens if we don't have water security, for example. We have water scarcity. And what does that result in? What does that mean for society? And specifically, what does it mean for business? Business, as many of you are aware, deals with the language of things like cost saving, profit, etc. But risk is also another key word that business relates to. So very simply, water scarcity, if it occurs, is a critical risk for business. And it's the kind of language that we need to obviously focus on, that industry is focusing on as a way to address water issues. But as you'll see, water risk takes you beyond efficiency. It takes you into a number of other areas which I'll unpack as we go along. But essentially, water scarcity is a critical risk for business. And there are a number of reasons for that. And some of them are very easy and very easy to understand. But essentially, water is an operational risk, but it's also a strategic risk. So I've given you a little list there of some of the key risks. I'll go through them. Firstly, if you run a business that requires water, obviously your business can't function without water. So business continuity is the term that's really used. It's the sense that if we don't have water, we can't run our business. Nestle in this country became very concerned about water when they started having supply disruptions. They then became actively involved in the wider area in which they were operating and tried to address it because they couldn't produce their product. So business continuity is fundamental. It's a key risk. The other thing is you may well have a project that you want to go ahead, you can't get the water for it, and actually your investment could fail. And we've seen examples of this globally where billions of dollars have been poured into projects only for water and lack of water access to be denied to them over time for various reasons and for projects to end. So a lack of water or water scarcity can impede project investment. These are obviously things that businesses care a lot about. Another key thing is supply chains. So we see, for example, quite a few of the food retailers are working in the agricultural supply chain, looking at water risks in those areas, because supply chain is where a lot of your risks actually might lie. So if you haven't got water, or if water is a key aspect of part of your supply chain, you could lose out. There could be a risk that you face over time. And sometimes it's very hard to detect. It could be a very small component of what you need that is effectively disturbed, and your whole supply chain can be affected, your whole product development can be affected. So another key risk that companies could face. The other one, of course, is employee health and productivity. If you haven't got water, your productivity may be affected. You may have severe illnesses that can't be treated, etc. Or worse, obviously, you could have contaminated water that some of your employees are accessing. So productivity can be affected. It can be an issue, depending on where you're based. Another important thing is to think about how consumers behave, how they will respond to your products. So Unilever has this good example where, for them, water is an absolutely fundamental strategic access issue. Because if they want companies to make if they want consumers to make use of their products, they need to have access to water. So a lot of their strategy, Unilever's strategy, is based around understanding that they have to be able to provide or help communities have access to water if they want them to use their products. Because the alternative, which is already occurring, is that sometimes people choose to use other products that don't require water. So there's also a sort of business imperative, and obviously the business imperative is fundamental to all of these approaches. But as you'll see, there's a shared value model, I think, that can be based here. A shared value for both businesses, civil society, communities, and governments in the water sphere. And that's obviously the sort of sweet spot that you're aiming to achieve. In addition to that, we see that there's a new growth of investor concerns around water, as we mentioned the World Economic Forum. But more broadly, investors are concerned about water issues. It's not quite at the same level, I would say, as what's happened with climate change and carbon, but there's been a much growing intention of investors to look at water issues and water risk as a way of understanding risks to their portfolios and risks of companies that they invested in. And I've listed some very good examples that are actively involved in the water space at the moment, effectively. Just to also highlight that we often speak about water security in the context of water quantity and water access and avoiding water shedding, but the quality is equally important. And if the quality is not sufficient, then again, your water risks can be very, very high. So just to paint a picture of water risk, this is basically the foundations of the business case. Why a business takes water seriously or should take water seriously, and what sort of risks they face effectively. Of course, there are also wider socioeconomic issues, and that's why I say we can look at operational issues, we can even look at supply chains, but we can't think of businesses outside of their local context. We need to think about potential competition for water resources and how that will affect the social stability in a particular area, engagement with communities or relationship with your surrounding communities is a fundamentally important issue for business and the role of business in society. So competition is very important. The other issue could, of course, be some sort of competition in the use of power for various sources, water for various sources, including power generation. So the wider sort of macro picture is also very important. That regional context is very important. So this is not to say that business is not doing stuff. They're doing quite a lot. There's a number of initiatives on the ground, but I'm just going to highlight one example, and that's to say that business has identified water as a key risk. So some of you may be aware of the CDP, what is formerly called the Carbon Disclosure Project. They have a water disclosure project, but basically it's called CDP Water. They're the world's largest global reporting initiative on environmental issues all across the world. And they have a water program which also is run in this country. And it clearly states, for example, the South African report of 2014 clearly says that risks from water are immediate and will have significant impacts. So South African companies know, that our top companies in the country know that water is an immediate risk, that it's a higher risk for them. So they know they have to act. If you look at the CDP website, you can see all of the CDP water reports. You'll get a very good sense of how companies are thinking about water, how they're responding to water risk, and how they're engaging beyond efficiency to look at other operational measures, also other wider sort of contextual efforts that they're engaged with. So businesses definitely identify the risk. Many of them are actively addressing those risks as well. There's a quick quote, just to give you a sense, going back to what I was saying, that water security or water access is fundamental to business activity. This is the CEO of the CDP talking about basically water being an essential resource for businesses and the potential for water-related problems to affect brand, etc., their own company growth, business continuity. All of these things are fundamental. And it's why we hopefully will see an increasing driver for company action on water issues going forward. And of course, we see some of these concerns playing out. I mean, I'm not going to dwell on them, but we know that we have concerns around the allocation of water, around the future demand of water. And so this obviously manifests in obvious things. There are concerns around drought. There are obviously water service delivery protests. There are various things that we associate with. And obviously the intention, the goal is to avoid that at all costs and to avoid a situation where we respond to a crisis, as in many ways we have done in the electricity sector, as an example, to try and avoid some of those pitfalls. Just to also highlight that water pricing, or the pricing of water, is also a function of water scarcity. So as water becomes more scarce, the price of water also increases. And that can also affect affordability, so then you can also come back to issues. It also creates a risk for companies as well. If the cost of water is higher, your cost of doing business are higher. And we only have to think about the electricity sector to know how this will play out. At one stage, everything seems fine and the prices are very low historically and internationally exceptionally low. And before you know it, there's this exponential increase in costs and there's affordability challenge, there's a social equity issue, and things start to develop. So we need to be aware that water pricing is also a function of water availability and water quality. I'm not going to in any way explain this graph. I will leave that to Valerie. But in essence, just to give you one example from the Western Cape province, we know that some of the work that's been done by the Department of Water, or was then Water Affairs, shows that, for example, we may well have to move to desalination without, if we haven't got water conservation, by as early as around 2020. That's sort of like, 5 years from now. So as your water needs increase, or as your water scarcity becomes an increasing issue, the kinds of technologies you have to use, the kinds of things you have to employ become increasingly expensive. So again, just to illustrate that the water pricing aspect is something that is a function to a large extent, obviously other factors, but it's closely related to water scarcity. And these obviously these are examples available for most water regions of the country. Having said that, so that's framing water scarcity as a risk for business, but there's also certainly opportunities for businesses as well, and that's where we will look at the key things that are available to them. Essentially, I think there are three main things, and this is certainly just I guess it's an MBI sort of approach, if you like, but there are three main things that companies can do. The first is to get their own house in order, and that's where a lot of the water efficiency work would come into it. That builds credibility. It builds an understanding of what water is about and what you need to do, and also just understanding the terminology. But that's only the first step in the process. So if you engage in that kind of behavior, that's excellent. But you also want to think about the economic opportunities, the commercial opportunities, new products, new technologies, innovation. The private sector is usually the key innovator in society. And thirdly, and also very important, is this idea of collective action or shared value. And I'll talk a bit more about that and why that's important. But in essence, engaging these three areas can reduce risk. It can also create opportunity, and that's effectively the language of business is what's important to them, and it should create a shared value proposition for them. And that's hopefully what we see. We see growing evidence of this country of that kind of behavior already. So just to go for the first one very quickly. So the opportunities for business are to basically improve their cost savings, to manage their water more efficiently. There are whole ways you can do that, but water reuse and recycling, water efficiency and conservation, understanding your risk. That's all the kind of internal in-house stuff you want to get right. If you get that right, then obviously it helps you in your further efforts going forward. Secondly is the opportunities to innovate. So there are a variety of technologies, multiple opportunities that are already being explored by the private sector. And so one mustn't forget the opportunities that are available to us in a whole range of areas. From products and services to specific project investment, there are a variety of things that can be done. And just giving you some sort of niche examples of that. One comment, the urbanization issue is tricky, but I guess at least urban environments do provide economies of scale, and they should therefore provide a viable market for products and services. But that's a debate that we can have. And then finally, and another key point that I want to pick up on. So outside of your own operational area, there are key issues that need to be addressed. And that really revolves around the idea of engaging collective action and what is referred to in the discourse or in the field as water stewardship. And that's basically those key things are absolutely essential if we want to secure our water future. So what is water stewardship? It's basically managing something that you don't own, but that is important to you. It's recognizing that a lot of your water risks lie outside of your fence line, for example. And it's understanding that we need to work with partners who are engaged in delivery of water. Things like, especially municipalities, national departments, communities, and supply chains as well. So it's a collaborative approach. It's an approach that sees that the solution has to be addressed through shared action. And fundamentally, the reason why it has to be done is because, and I'm sorry if I borrow this cartoon from my colleagues at CDP Water, it's because there's no value in being a clean fish in a dirty pond. So a lot of the time you can have your own house in order and you can be highly efficient. And probably you will look at water reuse and have your decentralized water applications. But very often you're still highly dependent on your surrounding area and surrounding distribution of water. So you may well have to think about the wider catchment that you're engaged with, and a lot of your risks and opportunities often lie there. The biggest opportunities for water savings are often outside of your own fence line. The water quality issues could well be a function of others outside of your sphere of influence. So it's understanding water as a shared resource, as a common good, as referred to earlier, and then therefore engaging in this wider collective action. And that sort of terminology, the whole paradigm is basically around water stewardship. So that's the third key area, essentially. Just very briefly, what is the MBI doing? Just to say that there are a number of initiatives that are ongoing. Some of you may have heard already of the SWPN, which does a lot of this kind of work, the Strategic Water Partners Network. Ourselves, firstly, we manage the CDP Water Program in South Africa, so we do a lot of the company reporting on their climate risks and opportunities and getting to grips with water issues. We do a lot of our capacity building of our members, helping them understand what's going on. So there is work that is going on in this field. There are companies that are engaging strongly in water efforts and doing a lot of innovative stuff, but obviously clearly more needs to be done. Just to highlight that we also partner with some key people in the space to try and bring some of the cutting-edge thinking on water reuse, on water stewardship to the South African context. It's very important to obviously be linked to the international thinking and innovation that's occurring globally as well. And then finally, we do also help partner with companies to identify co-funding for water stewardship projects. So where there are viable projects where you can work outside of your operational fence line to help, say, reduce water leakage in a particular area or a particular municipality, or work with a particular local area, there are opportunities to gain access to financing, and that's something we also do. So we do a mixture of sort of capacity building, policy-related research, and actual project implementation as well. So just sort of finally, in summary, I think it's essential that we have proactive measures to support water security. I think we're in the situation where if we don't respond in the way we probably would like to have responded 10 years ago in the power sector, we will face similar challenges, both in terms of water security and water pricing. Getting your own houses in order is important. As I say, it creates credibility, it helps you understand what you're doing, but that's the first step, and operational efficiency is only one aspect of what you need to do. A lot of the risks and opportunities lie outside of your operational fence line, in your supply chain, in your catchment area, and therefore one needs to engage in that sphere as well. And that a water secure future will definitely benefit hugely from business efforts and innovation. We've already seen that globally, we've already seen that locally as well. Thank you very much.